It seems that music has always been around. It wasn't invented any more than was fire and water. Music and its place in history is a series in 14 episodes. Its aim is to be a primer, or an overview, of music throughout history, offering an infinite number of triggers that could inspire more research and study. The first episode was about antiquity. The second one covered the Middle Ages. This one is about the Renaissance. We'll start with an instrumental rondeau by the Burgundian composer Hein van Ghizeghem. As we listen, we'll see some significant images representing the Renaissance. A renaissance is a renewal or a rebirth. A rebirth of what? The simple answer is a renewed interest in the legacies of ancient Greece and Rome. But why? There are a few reasons. The fundamental concepts of religion redefined life in the Middle Ages and also a person's expectations about an afterlife. In the Renaissance, people began again to have an interest in making something significant out of their lives on Earth. The process toward humanism was gradual, of course, and it came in part from a slow improvement in education and literacy. The printing press aided the process, which made information more widely available and cheaper to people who were inclined to seek it out. In the Middle Ages, the feudal system was a norm. Most people lived in rural land areas called fiefs, each with a lord overseeing it. The peasants who lived on the land provided the labor and paid taxes to the fiefdom. The feudal system provided the typical person with security and stability, but few choices. One could be born into or strive, if possible, to attain the status of nobility, or be a peasant. Around medieval Europe, you also had the option of entering the service of the church. Another financial economy existed at the same time, especially around the Mediterranean Sea. Manufacturing of goods occurred in the cities by the coast, and trade was common between the various empires. In the Renaissance, the assets from trade and commerce accelerated, and especially so after the New World was discovered. The wealth became more accessible across social classes, representing another kind of progress toward modern civilization. I need to emphasize that the typical person didn't feel these changes happen. For most people, life went on as before. Even the money didn't easily move out of the hands of the rich, but we see these shifts as significant in the larger scale of history. Through the Middle Ages, the cultural center around Europe was not Rome or Paris. It was Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Constantinople was a smart and cosmopolitan city during the Middle Ages, blending Middle Eastern, Roman, and Greek influences. It was a repository, so to speak, of ancient Greek and Roman culture. Constantinople's fortunes were to change in the 15th century. The Islamic Caliphate that had spread in the 8th century evolved toward the Ottoman Empire at the end of the 13th. Especially after the Christian Crusades, the Ottoman Turks sought to recover Constantinople. For a century and a half, there was pressure on the city, and it finally fell in 1453. The fall of Constantinople is a convenient delineation between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Many Greeks went into refuge again, this time toward northern Italy, bringing their knowledge and assets with them. In some sense, the intellectual heart of Constantinople simply picked up and moved to Italy. But why Italy? Italy was a collection of independent city-states at the time. They were wealthy from mining and manufacturing and trade. Venice was ruled by a council of noble families. Milan was a duchy, a type of monarchy led by a duke. Rome had declined a lot since the days of the empire. During the 14th century, the Pope had even moved to Avignon, France. But by the time the Renaissance began, the Pope was back in Rome, and the period called the Great Schism was over. In reality, the Pope then ruled Rome, and we see the ancient city of Rome attempt to flourish again, with the Pope as the principal political and financial force. When we think of the Renaissance, there is one city that seems nearly synonymous with it: Florence. It was extremely wealthy, or at least had a lot of extremely wealthy people. Of all the places in the world at this moment, this was a great place to be. The city's financial strength and influence were made possible by the Medicis, a wealthy merchant family who helped fund the general well-being of the community and also who were especially intelligent and generous patrons of the arts. The Renaissance was therefore the result of several factors. Florence was a special place, but the values of the Renaissance spread and blossomed such that the future of all of Europe evolved increasingly toward humanistic values. Again, nothing was sudden. If you weren't actually in Florence, you might not have noticed the shift. The Renaissance really is about Europe's renewal and its rediscovery of its past heritages. It was in the visual arts that the Renaissance is most clearly revealed. Works by the painter Botticelli, the sculptor Donatello, Raphael, a painter, and Michelangelo, equally known as a painter and sculptor. Leonardo da Vinci was your quintessential Renaissance man. He was a painter and sculptor as well, but his interest in these fields was part of a fuller fascination with learning and science. He learned about the human body so he could paint it more authentically. He learned about the relationships between physics, architecture, philosophy, and music. When thinking about the music of the Renaissance, our attention needs to go beyond Italy. Musical scholarship was happening north of the Alps, so for a while, the evolution of music continued there. Even the major music posts in Italian cities were held by somebody who was Franco-Flemish by birth or training, at least until the later Renaissance. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century was as significant of an advancement for music as was the ability to notate music that developed a few centuries before. The medieval music manuscripts are often truly artful creations, of which several very important ones have survived, but they are rare, because every book was an original, created by scribes and illuminated by artists. In the Renaissance, with the printing press, every composer was able to make their written music more widely available. Therefore, many more musical scores from the Renaissance have survived over the centuries. The access to volumes of written music means that the process of knowing about the music is no longer the domain of anthropology and sociology. There is still the necessary job of taking that score and understanding it as music, but the research is in the domain of the musician. The issue is about performance practice. These are the written notes and rhythms. Now, how would they have been played or sung? What's the style? What's the more appropriate interpretation? Guillaume Dufay is often associated with the Duchy of Burgundy in the earlier part of the 15th century. He was a well-traveled and a celebrated composer and teacher. Many of his compositions are sacred. He was clearly concerned about the sound that occurred point to point, or in modern terms, the resulting harmony. But we should keep in mind that harmony, such as chords and chord progression, had no theories yet. Composing at the time used several strategies for melodic combination and structural devices, but harmonic design was not among them. In England, John Dunstable was a leading composer, and people like Dufay may have known him. Certainly they would have known each other's music. Dunstable and other English composers did not feel bound by such constraints as the Gregorian church modes and the use of a cantus firmus, so the music from England already possessed a different sound. The major mode is more common, and counterpoint often employed thirds and sixths, which composers on the continent weren't sure were theoretically consonant. But the English sound appealed broadly, and in the generations of composers that followed, that fuller sound became more widely used and familiar. Josquin de Prez is the most important Franco-Flemish composer in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, a couple generations after Dufay. He was explicit about his text setting, making sure that the words and the music's phrasing supported each other well. For Josquin, the words were meant to be understood, and the music was to illuminate their meaning. In Josquin's music, harmony seems designed. The chords are fuller and the cadences are satisfying. Tonality, as our modern ears know it, is beginning to function. There is a lot of sacred music in Josquin's output, although he found greater freedom when writing music that was not confined to liturgical association, such as this frottola, an Italian musical form that was flourishing at the time. There was considerable variety of music around Europe, both serious and playful. This French chanson by Clément Janequin cleverly incorporates bird calls. Tomás Luis de Victoria was a Spanish composer of sacred music of distinctive intensity. Carlo Gesualdo wrote harmonically adventurous Italian madrigals. They demonstrate a highly sophisticated ear for harmony even before harmony was a thing. And Orlando de Lasso's German Lieder and sacred motets are gems from the late 16th century. Back in England, three more composers demonstrate the evolving breadth of music composition there. Thomas Tallis worked for Henry VIII and wrote sacred music with either Latin or English texts. William Byrd was a versatile composer who also wrote sacred music. He's notable as well as a virginalist. The virginal was a popular keyboard instrument that would evolve through the harpsichord to the modern piano. John Dowland also wrote music for the solo musician to enjoy, and is known for his magnificent lute songs, that is, lyrics with lute accompaniment in the song tradition.
Behold a wonder here, love hath received his sight, which many hundred years hath not beheld the light, which many hundred years hath not beheld the light. Such beams infused be by Cynthia in his eyes, as first have made him see, and then have made him wise. As first have made him see, and then have made him wise. Love now no more will weep for them that laugh the while, nor wake for them that sleep, nor sigh for them that smile, nor wake for them that sleep, nor sigh for them that smile.
St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice supported some distinctive musical developments. Adrien Willaert, a Franco-Flemish composer, was appointed to St. Mark's in 1527. Toward the end of the Renaissance, those appointments would go to Italians, Giovanni Gabrieli, followed by Claudio Monteverdi. A feature of Gabrieli's music is his use of two choirs and organs, something that St. Mark's could uniquely facilitate. This antiphonal style used the space, the choirs, and brass in strategic, dramatic fashion. For Monteverdi, church music is secondary to confirming his place in history. His 5 books of Italian madrigals took that genre to a refined musical balance of text setting with a melody in a clear texture with harmonic support. Monteverdi is also known for having written one of the first operas, a new genre that blossoms in the Baroque period. We'll wrap up the story of the Renaissance with the composer that for most people connotes Renaissance music. If Florence is the iconic city of the Renaissance and Michelangelo is the iconic painter and sculptor, then Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina is the iconic composer. He was the choir master for Rome's St. Peter's Cathedral during the tumult of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. First, briefly about the Reformation. Two factors put the Catholic Church in a compromised position. The Pope was increasingly a politician, and the interests of the day were increasingly secular. One might say that the Church had a credibility problem, a public relations crisis. The Church had been struggling to finance St. Peter's in Rome, the Vatican, the artwork, and in fact the return to glory of the entire city of Rome. One significant revenue source was the fee charged for confessions. The Church was accused of abuse and corruption. Complaints were only met with more rigidness and dogma. Long-held concerns came to a head with Martin Luther's 1517 posting of complaints on a church in Wittenberg, Germany, articulating the issues and demanding reform. While Martin Luther didn't necessarily intend to break up the Christian church, that was, in fact, the result. The Reformation refers to the attempt to reform the Catholic Church. France sacked Rome in 1527, adding insult to injury. And in a wave of breakups, Lutheranism took a hold in northern Germany, and in England, the king split away from Rome to establish the Church of England. The Reformation probably was seen within the Church as a disintegration. In response, the Roman Catholic Church mounted a Counter-Reformation. It was an effort to counteract the damage from the Reformation. The Council of Trent met from 1545 to 1563. Their job was to discuss the developing issues that had created a threat to the Church's faith and authority. After identifying the problems, the Council drafted a response, decisions that would correct, appease, justify, reinforce, and redirect. Music was frequently a topic, probably because music is such a potent force in religious services, and the Council may have felt that the use of music had become inconsistent with the Church's intentions. About music, they thought there was too much secularism infiltrating the Church. Music was too complicated, and you couldn't understand the words. How was it that noisy instruments were being used inside the church? Instruments designed for being outside. They discussed people's attitudes, especially musicians with irreverent behavior. And they thought that some of the music was just poorly prepared and pronunciation sloppy. The final decree from the Council of Trent was a loosely worded statement demanding a return to the, quote, respectful house of prayer. Palestrina was called to St. Peter's in 1571. He was known to the Church. He had trained in Rome, and he had already served successfully in important choir master positions in Italy. Perhaps he could help the Church realize the goals of the Counter-Reformation. He was successful. Palestrina was able to create music of great beauty and deceptive simplicity. He was able to use polyphony as a primary compositional device while doing nothing to obscure the text. He was able to eliminate what they considered to be the objectionable displays of virtuosity without removing any musical interest and effectiveness. The sound gives the impression of perfection. It is gracefully metered, balanced in its use of highs and lows, mostly stepwise, mostly consonant, mostly melodic, but its use of skips, dissonance, and harmony is powerful and indispensable to the style. The general impression is rich. There is a general absence of surprise. It lacks dramatic impulse. It is vocal music. It really can't be anything else. Palestrina's music emerged as the ideal sound of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. It takes its place in history with the same magic and grace as the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.